Okay, welcome everyone. We should be live, and I think I've been planning this live event. I think 6 months ago, I had this idea to have four super Rust developers, Italian Rust developers on my channel. I finally made it just right before starting going to conferences, so that is why this would have been delayed to 2026. First of all, hi everyone. If you're in the chat, say hi, say bye, say namaste. And it's allowed to write Italian comments just for this live stream. We will speak mostly in English, I hope so. But feel free, if you have Pradumna from India, which is writing in Italian. Tommaso, ciao. I don't know if we ever met. So let's start. Let's start with the introduction. I'm really excited for this event. I was at a grocery store. I had to rush back just in time for this. So let's start. Hi, everyone. I met one of you in person, but I'll fix also this bug soon, hopefully 2025. Let's see. I have also big news. Maybe I'll share this as an exclusive in this one. So hi, everyone. Let's start with the introduction. Let's start with Luciano Mammino. I think Luciano has been the first person I ever met in person after starting my social media presence, and he was already really excited about Rust. I think he made a sort of influence because we spoke a lot about this. And yes, so Luciano, welcome, and please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Francesco. And yeah, I'm glad to be the culprit for your Rust journey, or at least an influence. I don't know if we can say that. But yeah, hello, everyone again. I am Luciano. What I can say about myself, kind of a full stack developer turned into cloud architect. And yeah, we'll probably talk more about Rust, but in general, I would say, yeah, JavaScript to Rust is kind of my background.
Perfect, Luciano. Thank you. And now I would like Luca to introduce himself. I think we've been connected for a while, but we never did like a real and proper call. So we are also here to fix this one. Luca is an author, book, active on social media, speaker. So Luca, please introduce yourself and welcome in this Rust Roundtable.
Well, my pleasure to finally make it. It's always difficult to make schedules work together. But yeah, name is Luca Palmieri, as Francesco was saying, and I've been in the Rust community for, to this point, 8 years, more or less. So relatively early, but not that early. Like Luciano, I am mostly a software architect, backend developer. So that's the part of the stack that I occupy and never get to currently. I've been doing a variety of things over the course of my career, from machine learning to machine learning engineering, and now mostly. And I happen to do consulting for Rust. I wrote a couple of books, as I was saying. I worked on a variety of projects, open source and not. Some are mine, some are companies, clients.
Lucas, I'm sorry for interrupting you. I think there are some sound issues. I don't know if it's on your side. Try to mute yourself for a second. Or maybe it was your... I don't know. Your microphone sounded great. At some point, it started to do something a bit weird. I don't know. Maybe I will go to Marco now. Yes, there is some noise. I don't know why. No idea
Quite
why.
Nice.
I don't know why. Let's go to Marco. Thank you, Luca. Let's see later if we can fix this. And Marco, I think we made a collaboration.
Yes.
In my head, it's a couple of weeks ago, but I'm sure it's more.
No, I think it was more. Yes.
More.
I don't remember when. Yeah, a couple of months ago, maybe. Yeah. Hi everyone. I'm Marco. I work at the Rust Foundation as a Rust infrastructure engineer. Let's say I work in the infrastructure team in the Rust project, and this is full time. But in my spare time, I maintain Release Please, which is a crate which lets you automate Rust releases.
Great, and we'll also talk about individual projects, of course. I want to give everyone space to talk about that. I think Release Please is a genius name. I think it's also based on another one. I think we already shared your story, but we will talk about this again. Perfect. So now I would like you to give like a couple of minutes just because I want to know like how did you get started and why. Because every time I go to a podcast or an event and they ask me like, okay, but how did this Rust craziness of thing start? So now I'm doing the same question to all of you, and I would like to know maybe the reasons why you started coding and also creating content, or basically everything you are doing with Rust. And then later we will also talk about your products, but I'm more interested about the initial phase and how you go started. Maybe let's start with Luciano, and then we will go with other ones. Let's see for Luca later. Luciano.
Okay, yeah. So my, I guess, origin story with Rust is maybe a bit complex. I think it's difficult to track the exact time where I started to be really committed to Rust. But in general, I've been always curious about lower level languages, as somebody who was developed mainly with high level languages for most of my career. And I've been using, I think, all sorts of high level languages from, I don't know, Visual Basic, PHP, lots of JavaScript, Python as well. So I was always a little bit curious to see like what was the appeal for lower level languages, what was the use case. And I think the main influence I got were two different friends. One that always pushed me to do this thing that he calls like go one level down, which basically means you are generally working on with a specific stack. So you maybe are very knowledgeable about that stack, whether it's a framework, a language, a platform, whatever. And his principle is basically if you understand how that level is built, so just look one level down, you probably will understand a lot more about what you're doing and you can probably optimize. So in that sense, I was trying to apply this principle to programming languages and try to understand, okay, what is kind of a lower level for a programming language. And then another friend suggested to have a look at Rust. And they were basically saying, with similar experience to me, like lots of high-level programming, web development, they were basically saying, yes, like it's a language that is very accessible. It's true that there is a little bit of a barrier because there are some new ideas that you need to really understand to be effectively using the language correctly and not being blocked at every single step. But once you do that, the language and the compiler and the tooling, everything is like very helpful. And it's actually kind of a guided way to get into lower level programming, because every time you do a mistake, it's not just hitting a wall, it's actually telling you, okay, this is what you can do to actually get to the next step to fix your problem. Or maybe that's where you can go to read about why this problem exists and then learn what you can do to fix it. So that's probably a summary for how I got started with Rust. And I think in general, once you get into that flow of trying maybe reading a little bit of the Rust book, trying some of the coding challenges that you can find online in different platforms, and then you start to be able to solve those challenges, I think it becomes a really enjoyable experience. And at that point, I don't think I've ever stopped. Although I cannot say that I do Rust 100% of my time. It's still maybe 10% of my time, so less than I would like it to be. But yeah, I haven't stopped since probably the last 5 years at this point.
And I think this is most of the sentiment of most of the people. I would like to say, everyone who tried Rust. I think that up now, I don't know a single person like tried Rust and stopped at all. I don't know, maybe I'll find someone at some point. But for now, we always have, it's like hitting the gym at least once a week. I say, okay, at least once a week I do that. Now it's a habit. So yes, thank you. Thank you also again, Luciano, because I remember you mentioning Cargo and the compiler. I don't know what we were in person. We were having a coffee, I think, here near the metro here. And I remember that say, okay, now I have to see. And then it really went very well. Luca, what about you? You say that you have been coding in Rust for like 8 years, if I remember it correctly, or maybe more.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Now the sound is back, so welcome. And,
I've done absolutely nothing, but it's great.
It has been fixed automatically. So what about you? I'm really curious about your answer.
So I found Rust by chance, as it happens to many. It was at the very beginning of my career. I was working as a machine learning engineer, which basically means I was doing a lot of Python, as it happens. And my CTO at the time mentioned that it's in this cool language and I can use named Rust, and then I should check it out. And that day I decided to take upon, I'm actually going to do that. So at some flight, I think for some vacation or something, and I just downloaded the ebook of the Rust book, started reading through, and it sounded interesting. And the use case I had at the time is, as I was doing, machine learning in Python, I had to write from time to time native extensions when I had to implement custom algorithms or things that run faster in native code than they do in Python proper. And C is very difficult. Python is very strange, and Rust just felt much more approachable in the way that it is difficult to actually get something to build, but then when it builds, I wouldn't say that it necessarily works, but at least it doesn't crash most of the time, which is already a big standard if you're trying to push something for production usage, which was my use case. And so that was my first encounter with Rust. I kept doing it on the side. I did a bunch of workshops on numerical algebra and contributed to a bunch of libraries. Then I switched companies, switched roles, moved towards the backend. I happened to do some C#, remembered my Rust days, and ended up introducing Rust at my workplace at the time, which was TrueLayer. To the point that it became one of the main languages and gave me the chance to work full-time with Rust for 3 years until I left. And at that point in my career, I continued in the Rust direction, job after job, just different type of situations, different type of tasks, but I haven't left the stack since. So for me, it's more like hitting the gym 5 days a week, plus some extras at this point.
Yeah, great. And I really like what you said about the good compromise, because of course there is no perfect language, but I really think that Rust hit the soft spot, when you have like many features with pros and cons, and I think that Rust really nailed in the good compromise between usability, performance, how hard is it, the output, the ecosystem, and so on. So at least this is my thought, that I found like the right one. Of course, not the perfect one for everything, but we will get there. And Marco, now from you, I'm a bit jealous about your Ferris in the background, but I will pretend that this doesn't exist. So
You will receive one this year, not publicware yet. So it was, for me, my origin story, it was 2019, and like basically every other day of my life I was watching YouTube, and I got this YouTube recommendation, which this video, which I can't find anymore, it was recommending like what's the perfect language for like writing a low-level code operating system. It was a talk, and it was comparing many things, or also like weird languages like Cyclone and stuff like that. And so I learned about Rust. So I looked at the book Rust by Example, but at first I didn't study it because I didn't like the syntax. It was a period of my life where I was trying to write very elegant code, and so instead of Rust I ended up learning Kotlin, which I think it's a nice language, but like I was only able to run my program by clicking on the play button on IntelliJ. I couldn't figure out how to, for example, run tests in CI. I couldn't learn Gradle, I don't know. And so after this experience, I realized that like the syntax is not like good reason to not learn a language. And so like performance, that it's native, that it has cargo, which is like it's trivial to run tests and compile and so on. I decided to learn Rust. I read the book, and it immediately clicked for me because I was coming from C and C++, and so like all the reasons why Rust might be a bit harder to grasp at first, like I got them, and I become basically obsessed with it. I was learning it and practicing it every single day until like end of 2020, when Luca hired me at TrueLayer, and that was my first full-time job in Rust.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Marco. And now we have the next question, which is in Italian, but I'll translate it, no worries. And by Gambit, he's basically asking. He has been working for 2-3 years as a Python Dart engineer. He would like to start using Rust. So if you're here, you're already curious. So that's it. And so this is exactly the question I wanted to ask, which is like, how much do you think that Rust is hard to learn for real? Because this is like one of the, let's say weak points, okay? But how is this for real? Because maybe after a while you have a different perception, but I think many people, they agree on this. So on my side, I see this as an advantage because this allows me to create more content about Rust. But what about the point of view of a developer who wants to learn it, and how much is so basically the question is how hard is Rust to learn? How hard is to learn Rust?
Can I take this? It's one of my favorite ones. I think it isn't hard. I think at this point we have a self-perpetuating myth that Rust is this impossible language to learn that just gets restated and restated and restated and restated. When I learned Rust 7 years ago, we didn't have non-lexical, we didn't have the NLL borrow checker, which for most of you that have picked up Rust in the last 5 to 6 years doesn't mean anything. But the borrow checker used to be extremely annoying, extremely difficult to please, very, very complicated. Errors were not very good. Rust has come a very long way in terms of ergonomics. So the real problem that I think a lot of people struggle with is that Rust is a large language, in a way very similarly to C++. And so when you look at Rust and you see traits and you see associated types, and then somebody tells you that there are generators and features and async and threads and unsafe, etc., you feel overwhelmed because like there's so much stuff that I need to know. Now, the reality of things is that whenever you use Rust for a specific purpose, you only need a very small subset of the language. That changes depending on the application you're trying to write. So the subset you need for embedded is different from the subset you need for backend, which is even different from the subset you need for CLIs. But it's usually perfectly fine, perfectly possible to learn the language in 3 to 4 days of actual studying, and then have the language click for you in like 4 weeks, more or less. And I would say that's the average for most programming languages. Like if somebody were to actually pick up something like Java seriously and wanted to write idiomatic Java, I don't think it would be able to do it much faster than in a couple of weeks. It's just that Rust, being a system programming language, requires you to be introduced to a couple more topics. So if you have never done memory management, so if you come from Python or JavaScript, you'll have to think a little bit about the hardware, a little bit more than what you're used to. But that's not to say that it's necessarily, everything is easy for somebody coming from C, because they may not be used to the functional constructs that you're already familiar with coming from JavaScript. So it's a bit like every background has its challenges and its pros. So you're going to find some things easier and some things more difficult. But it's perfectly possible. Like there's no need to get a PhD in Rustology. Everybody can be a proficient Rust programmer in a reasonable amount of time. Just gotta try.
Yeah, if I can add something there, I totally agree with Luca, first of all. But one thing that I want to mention, I had the fortune to be at Rust Nation last year, and I saw this talk by Andre Bogus called, I think, Logic on Twitter, and the metaverse and everything else. And this talk was called Easy Mode Rust. And I don't know if I'm gonna do the talk justice, but if I try to summarize it, the idea is that basically Rust, as many other languages, has a set of features that can be relatively simple to use and learn and use, and basically you can be very proficient with those features, and they can get you a very long way if you just use those features. So you can basically, if you just approach this kind of subset of Rust that is a little bit easier, you can be productive really quickly and then start to appreciate the language and do all the first few steps, rather than getting lost maybe in the more complex topics that you can always approach later when you need them. And generally the compromise is that maybe you're going to lose a little bit of very kind of raw, low-level performance because you're not kind of using the most optimized options for some of the problems. But at the same time, you can still get the job done. Probably your code is still going to be much faster than doing the same thing with a higher level interpreted programming language. So basically, you don't have anything to lose in most use cases just going with this easy subset of Rust. if in the future you ever need to really unlock that extra bit of performance, then you can study the more advanced topics and then get into all of that stuff. But it doesn't have to be the case that you need to learn all of Rust before you can do, I don't know, a coding challenge or build a small program or even just put something in production, right? You can get started relatively quickly if you approach Rust with this kind of mindset. So
I guess the counterpoint to what Andre says is that if you're new to the language, it's not immediately obvious what that easy subset is, which is where having a mentor or somebody that's reviewing your PR or a person you can talk to can go a long way in smoothing over the learning journey. So I guess that is the asterisk, the only caveat.
Absolutely, and probably the whole ecosystem in a sense is still relatively young because Rust is barely 10 years old, if I'm not wrong. But
just 10 years old.
Exactly.
Okay.
So
exactly 10 years old.
So for a language, I think this is still relatively young. So I think as a community, there is a need to create more content, more accessible paths for people to get started with. As you said, even private mentorship sessions. I think these are things that over time will be smoothed out, I would say organically, because just people will be able to help each other more, create more content, and come up, I think, with more enjoyable learning paths. Yes, we have some links there. I hope, Francesco, you can copy-paste them from the private chat.
Also, speaking about Rust Nation Talks, there was one from Lars Bergstrom, which works at Google, from Rust Nation 2024, who shared surveys that they did at Google about Rust adoption, and the outcome, you can search for it, but it was that it's not as hard as as other people say. Yes, it's similar, as Luca said, is comparable to other languages. And I would say that, of course, getting something to compile might be easier in other languages, maybe, but getting something production ready in other languages, I would say it's harder with respect to Rust. At least when something compiles in Rust, you know that you handled all the errors, that the program will, it's hard that it crashes, as Luca said. So maybe, doing basic stuff, I don't know, might be easier in other languages, but in Rust, you're more confident about what you wrote. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and this goes back to what I said before about the compromise. So it's when you have to buy, I bought a new shirt, not t-shirt, but shirt, but it costed more, but it was worth it because I have to go to a wedding. So this is exactly a similar analogy with Rust. So it takes you, of course, an extra effort. Otherwise, there will not be even something to talk about. So it makes sense. That is in some extent harder, I would say, at least at the beginning. But yes, and I think the only thing that should really have is an open mind to learn new things. I think especially senior developers, they don't want to learn another concept, or maybe it's a bit hard. And if you try to learn Rust but without understanding the new concepts, even if you're an expert senior developer, you might struggle. And so I don't know, some of them might not be happy in that case. It compiles, you're 90% on the way there. I would say even 95% if it compiles, maybe more than 90%. But yes, and Gambit says thank you. Perfect. Nice. Thank you. I'm really enjoying this conversation with all of you. And I would like now maybe to talk about your projects. I would like to give you some minutes because I'm honestly curious, because sometimes I don't have time to stay up to date with everything you do. So I know that Marco has a library, Luciano, Luca has very different books. I have no idea how many. So I would like maybe to talk about your experience in creating stuff with Rust. So what has been your experience? And maybe you can mention your best project or your two best projects now. Also in the process of writing a Rust book, my first experience as an author of a book. So I'm really curious to know from your point of view, something that you're really proud maybe in the Rust ecosystem. let's start with Luciano again.
Thank you for giving me the first space. Yeah, so one thing I would like to share, because if I have to be honest, like I haven't been able, for different reasons, just because my job is probably more focused like on cloud architecture, so I don't always get to do Rust, although I have to say I push a lot and some customers eventually are happy to adopt it. But generally, because I work a lot with AWS and serverless, my main use case has been trying to put Rust inside AWS Lambda. So, which is, for people that are not familiar with, is the function as a service tool that you have when you use AWS. So effectively, you write your code as a function, and then there is an event-driven system that allows you to say, when this event happens, run this code. And you can use that to build APIs and all kinds of applications. So in that context, basically, I think that Rust has a very clear advantage, although it's still not very highly exploited, I would say, by the market, because by being a compiled language, it is very fast to execute. And in this kind of environments, you generally pay per execution time and amount of memory that you allocate. So runs fast, which means it's going to cost you less. Generally, it doesn't require as much memory as interpreted languages like JavaScript and Python, which are the main ones generally used in this kind of context. So you can even save by reducing the amount of allocated memory. And also there are other benefits, like I could get a lot into detail. I'm going to try to avoid that. But I think Rust is like a great use case for this particular environment. So one thing that I've been working on for, I think now it's almost 1 year, and it's still a work in progress, is a book called Crafting Lambda Functions in Rust. You can find it at rust-lambda.com. I'll put the link there in the chat. And basically the idea is that myself, James Eastham, who also had a similar journey as I had by trying to run Rust in Lambda, we are trying to share everything we learned so far. And it's a book that basically guides you to learn what are all the steps, what are the benefits, and eventually you are building a real life application through reading the book and going through one chapter to the next and doing all the exercises.
Thank you, Luciano. I was sharing your link. I think it should be shared. Let's see. Rust-lambda.com. I think I shared maybe twice. It's fine. We shared this 2 times.
Thank you.
Better. Yes, thank you, Luciano. And yes, if you want to make a group, just me and you, just to stay accountable on writing things, we can create it. So we can, just push each other because it's hard, let's say. And talking about writing things, I would like Luca. Now I would like you to share also what you created in the Rust ecosystem. I already shared a couple of links. Maybe if you currently have a new project, I know that you've been working a lot in this area. So, Luca, what about you?
What about me? So I wrote 2 books in Rust. Probably the best known is Zero to Production in Rust, which is a start to finish guide on how to develop backend services in Rust. It assumes you know the basics of the language, so it's not a zero to hero journey. You need to be familiar with enough Rust to be dangerous. That's how I like to frame it. And then from there, we cover how to do testing, how to build an API, how to do authentication, how to do deployments, and the likes. That was kind of born by accident as a book. As Marco was mentioning before, I built a fairly large team when I was a true layer. I think by the time I left, we were talking about 30, 40 people doing Rust in various parts of the company. And when you have so many people joining in such a short time, you need to train them. And at that point in time, so we're talking about 4 or 5 years ago at this point, I don't even remember, there was no good book. There was no good single point of reference that you can give to a person, say, read this, and then you're ready to go. And so I started what was a series of blog posts as a way of these are how we develop backend services. And then once that crossed probably the 100-page mark, I was like, well, actually, this is more of a book than a series of blog posts. And so that came to be. It was very successful beyond my initial expectations. And I keep it up to date. So it's always more or less current. I usually release an update every 6 months or so. Not that it changes the book much, but just to make sure everything is current. The other one is Rust Exercises, which I wrote as part of my job here at May Matter. And it's an introduction to Rust hands-on. So it's similar to Rustlinks, a more well-known project in the Rust ecosystem. But unlike Rustlinks, it's both the theory and the practice. So it's a bit like if Rustlinks and the Rust book had a kid, that would be 100 exercises to learn Rust. And it's fairly good. I usually use it to teach Rust to people over 3 to 4 days, depending on their background. And I think it really hits the point, or at least it matches my philosophy of teaching programming languages. You need to write code if you want to learn Rust. Like, it's very easy to read the Rust book as if it was a novel. And, you arrive at the end and you're like, I know this language, like in Matrix, when Neo learns Kung Fu. And then you actually try to write something not even difficult, just intermediate, and you're completely lost because you haven't actually practiced the concepts. So writing code, it's what actually gets Rust flowing under your fingers, and that's why that book is the way it is. The nice thing about Under Exercise is that it's fully available online, so you don't have to buy the book. You can buy the book if you like to have something physical to kind of browse through, but other than that, everything's on the website. Which also contains a bunch of other things for other aspects of Rust. But yeah, that's my author side. Other than that, I maintain probably too many libraries in the Rust ecosystem at various level of active maintenance, mostly solving my own problems as I came into them, which happen to be sometimes other people's problems. So I maintain the wire mock for Rust, for integration testing, maintain Cargo Chef for Docker caching. And I'm running a new Rust framework, which is called Pavex, which is probably where I spend most of my time these days. It's not yet ready for, public usage. It's still in private beta, but it's shaping up to be quite nice. And it's kind of like my way of trying to give shape to a lot of learnings from the past few years, actually developing Rust applications and crystallize what I think would be a good architecture to do so. But early days, probably still 6-7 months of work ahead before that's ready to roar. But yeah, that's what I do.
Thank you so much, Luca. I am checking now, for example, the Pavex framework, because, for example, I didn't know this, so I will check this, and then I will give you a feedback. But this is why, for example, I like to make these events, so I also know more about all of you, and we also share both of the links below. And thank you, and good luck also with all your cool stuff you are doing. Marco, what about you? I already know the answer, but I want to know you to share about your Rust, let's say, on the creation side, and maybe some projects. In the meanwhile, I'm checking some stuff.
Sure. Yeah. While I was at TrueLayer, we were starting to publish our first open source crates, and I noticed that it was a lot of work because you need to create the tags, you need to push them, run cargo publish, update the changelog, all these manual tasks. So I looked for something that could automate this process, and I didn't find something that did it how I wanted. And so I created this tool called Release Please, which analyzes your commit history and populates the changelog. It determines the next version automatically based on both conventional commits, so you can say if something has a breaking change or if it's a new feature and so on, but also by using a tool called Cargo Semver Checks, which tells you if you have breaking changes in your code in your next version. For example, I don't know, you are changing the number of arguments of a function. And so based on this, it determines the new version. Release Please also runs cargo publish, and it prepares the new release in a pull request. And when you merge this, it publishes everything. That's what I'm working on in my spare time mainly. Yes. Many people, there are 5 or 6 projects in the Rust project itself, under Rust Lang organization that use it, which makes me really proud. Yes, that's it.
Thank you, Marco. And I added all these links in the description, so I don't forget to do this later. So feel free to check them out. If you have any questions, this is probably the best moment to drop your questions because we already crossed 30 minutes. I still want to have some fun here and to talk with my Italian friends. But if you want to ask something, I think we had some questions. Let's talk about this one by Tommaso. What is the Rust struct aspect, etc., you found harder to understand? I started pin. What's your something that has been hard to grasp? Let's see. Do you have any?
I can say something maybe a bit controversial, or maybe the one that
we are
is
here for
expected.
controversial takes. We are in a live stream, so anything controversial is welcome.
Yeah, no, for sure there are more complex stuff in Rust, but I initially, when I started learning Rust, I was a bit puzzled by the lack of null types. So that there isn't like a null type, which is something that I've seen in almost any other language that I've used before. And it kind of made me thinking a lot. And I think initially I was trying to fight this lack of the null type. But then I think eventually when the result type and the option type clicked into me, this is something that now I'm even trying to replicate in languages that actually have null types. So kind of either using third-party libraries or building my own wrappers to try to avoid having null. So maybe I don't know if that's actually answering this particular question, but it's something that I think I struggled a lot to kind of really understand and appreciate. But then when I did, there was no turning back. So maybe that's my take.
Yes, I think there are articles like, I don't know, the null was a mistake. We're not even talking about JavaScript. Let's say also in other languages, that this was one of the mistakes, just to to express the concept of nothing. I don't know, the ancient Romans, they didn't have the zero, for example, or something like that. So expressing an empty value has always been something a bit tricky. But no, this absolutely counts as an answer. I think it also depends on at which time. What else? Do you have, Luca and Marco, something you remember that has been a bit
for
hard?
example, I remember I read the lifetime chapters of the Rust book multiple times before I got it. Yeah. And it's like there are some things that at the beginning you need to basically relearn if you don't use them constantly. Yeah.
I guess in my case was a bit understanding the role that unsafe played in the larger language, which is a part of Rust that I haven't touched for many, many years. I only got to do unsafe a lot later, mostly because it felt scary and I didn't need to. I would say that has been probably the toughest part.
Yes, I also... Go, Luciano.
Nobody mentioned macros. Just wanted to say that.
Yeah, no, macros not that hard. Probably I'd go with the initial impact, with all the ownership thing, because usually I'm very stubborn I don't want to learn new things. I want to apply things I already know, as I mentioned, if you're already, especially if you coded many years. So this, I don't know, this literally created some sort of shortcut so it has been a bit hard to grasp because I've been coding in a different language for many years. So I had to know, just you, Luciano, you had to know just to relearn the things. If you learn things in a certain way, it's a bit hard to rewire your brain. So that's it. If you're in the chat, feel free to drop also what has been hard for you. I also dropped a poll about what's your experience with Rust, advanced, intermediate, beginner, or Jon Snow. For now, we have beginner at 43% and Jon Snow 14%. So let's say 50% of the people here, they are not intermediate or experts, or at least this is how they define themselves. Feel free to drop what has been hard. This is also good for me. If maybe I can take inspiration maybe for future content, future ideas, future posts, future annoying posts on Twitter, and so on. So I see here, and yes, A Warladorn. He also writes Rust code. Great. I think we had a question a bit earlier about Docker. This one, I don't know if you can answer this one. The cargo chef, you tried cache dependencies in Docker file, but the compiler still taking long time. Do you know about this?
Depends on. We'll have to look at the thing. It's difficult to answer it.
Okay. Biagio, if you are still there, maybe you can share. I don't think we have other questions, but if you have one, you can drop it, of course. So we already mentioned about personal projects, but I would like maybe to do another round of like favorite Rust tool / create / framework. If you have something that you want to mention, even if it's not by you, if you want to do a shout out to someone, so some Rust tool creator framework that you like, even if you're not the author.
Should I go first?
Go, Luciano. You are the icebreaker now.
Okay. So I really want to give a shout out to Cargo Lambda, which is actually interesting probably to mention that Cargo in itself, we already said that is kind of the CLI tool that allows you to do lots of things, from managing dependencies, bootstrapping projects, and things like that. The cool thing that I found that I wish existed in other tools like that for other languages is that it can easily be extended. So you can easily add subcommands to it by installing specific dependencies. And Cargo Lambda is one of those things. So you can effectively add additional commands that are not built in by default, that in this case, they are very specific to when you want to work in Rust in the context of AWS Lambda. And this was built by an engineer that used to work at AWS called David Calavera. So I'd like to give him a big shout out. And yeah, it's just a phenomenal tool because it gets you started so quickly. You can easily scaffold a new project, and it gives you the entire structure where you just need to put your own business logic. Then you can easily test it locally, cross-compile, deploy, integrates with infrastructure as code. So it's kind of my go-to recommendation for anyone that wants to try to do Lambda functions in Rust.
Great. I shared a link. I hope that it was correct. cargo-lambda.info. I don't know if it was the right one. Perfect. Great. We also add this link below. I see also someone also has their Cargo Lambda is my favorite Rust tool. Feel free also to drop your favorite Rust tool. We have Tommaso Rust Up. Amanibas, it's a bit harder to translate, let's say, for sure, I would say. And yes. What about you, Luca? You have...
I mean, there are the obvious ones, right? Like everything in the Rust tool chain is pretty handy, from Clippy to the formatter, etc., etc. If I have to go for some niche things, but I do end up using quite often, I would say that, for example, PetGraph has been a stable companion of mine, which is a Rust library for managing graph data structures, which is incredibly versatile. So that happens to be something you do. It's great. There's Miet as well, which is very good when you want to do CLI application with return beautiful errors on the terminal. That has been quite useful in more than a few projects. And I mean, the list would be very, 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 very long. It's very interesting how Rust has accrued over the years a set of core crates, which are not part of the standard library, but can be treated as such in many ways. And how those just become part of your toolkit. So a large part of becoming a good Rust developer is just building that set of crates, getting familiar with them, and be able to use them when the occasion arises.
Thank you, Luca. And I think if you have the link, we can even also share it now. I see also other people in the chat that they are mentioning their favorite Rust tool. This is probably the best moment to also do some shout out. Maybe we'll add some links in the description. So let's support the community and the tools you really like. Marco, what about you? What are your favorite Rust things, tools, and crates? And frameworks?
So there are so many Rust tools that it's incredible. Like I think many people maybe use them, like, I don't know, rip, grep, stuff like that, and they don't even know that they're written in Rust. Maybe, like, for example, rip, grep is in VS Code. But anyway, so for my favorite crates, it kind of the obvious ones, but like Serdi and the Clap, like the way you can express some concepts in code is incredible. And like if I had to show Rust code to someone, I will show, maybe a CLI that uses Clap and that manipulates data with Serdi. I think, for me, when I discovered them, it was mind-blowing. And if I need to name another tool, Cargos and Vertex, yes, I already mentioned, but it's incredible. And I hope that tool like this also existed. I wish that tools like Cargos and Vertex existed for other languages as well. Yeah. Because like they avoid that users break their code when they upgrade, so it's very important.
Thank you, Marco. I remember my first contact with Serde was directly in a live stream. I tried to create a Rust web framework, Rust web server without any framework. So I had to explore, okay, how does Rust serialize? And it serializes data, Serde. So I tried to use it. It was, I think, a 12-hour live stream. It was a bit long to re-implement from scratch, but I learned a lot. I learned also to appreciate how the frameworks and when this serialization is given out of the box. But this is how it works to learn. Like, well, you need to struggle a bit to see how useful they are. And of course, I think this is basically all my Rust videos, I think, because I also focus a lot on the Rust and web development. One, I think I also liked your Luca, the one about creating graphs. I think I will check it out because I'm curious really about this. I think that these packages that they help you to create other things, other data structures, they are probably the one that you'll keep using them because you don't want to go at that low level that you have to re-implement
the foundational blocks.
Exactly. So the basics of the data structure, so we can focus on other problems, I would say. Perfect. Thank you. I'm also learning a lot. This has been a very meaningful conversation for me. So I'm getting a lot of inputs, also new videos and stuff to mention. And I would like maybe to talk about now also other languages. You might be shocked, but there are also other programming languages other than Rust. And I would like you to mention maybe how maybe writing Rust code influenced how you work in other languages. I will start again with Luciano, but just because he gave a hook about this question. Remember the null, the answer about the null. So did Rust influence how you write code in other languages? Yes, no, make it better, worse, or also no, in other problems about Rust, the whole life. I always make jokes about Rust and running and exercising because I'm exercising a lot lately. But what about this approach with other languages and also about code, I would say, mostly?
Yeah, I think that the reality for me is that I'm still writing mostly JavaScript, TypeScript for professionally. And I would like to do more Rust, and definitely I've been learning a lot about Rust in the last 4 to 5 years. And I already gave the hook that one of my favorite features is the lack of null and result types and optional types. And in particular, I think in JavaScript, the exception system is a little bit weak for many reasons. Like, I don't know, for example, in a catch block, you don't really have the type of the exception, so you cannot specify different types and then have different catch blocks if you want to handle different types of exception differently. So you need to write your own kind of mini router to discriminate, okay, what is this exception? What do I need to do? And which is always very annoying. And I've seen lots and lots of cases in production where people just don't care enough to do all of that work. And then in reality, you have all sorts of random crashes in production because that error handling logic just isn't as robust as it needs to be for many real life use cases. Effectively, you end up patching a lot for years until you get to the point where it's somewhat stable and reliable. And I think in Rust, the story there is much better. And I really like the approach with the result where you don't, like, the model is very different. I don't know if I'm going to be able to explain it succinctly in a short amount of time, but that model is something that I'm trying to replicate a little bit more in some of my JavaScript code, where I, rather than using exception, I use effectively objects that represent either a successful value or an error, and I'm kind of forcing that way whoever is using that code to be explicit about, okay, how do I know if this is an error or is a result? I actually need to check, I need to handle the error. And I think I've seen that has been beneficial, although sometimes it's a little bit controversial. Sometimes you have to explain to colleagues why you are doing it like that and what kind of properties are you trying to bring to the code. But I think when it clicks, I think everyone is actually enjoy using that pattern. And myself, I'm trying to use it a lot more. And I think it makes the code a little bit more readable and reliable from the first time you write it.
Yes, and I also want to mention, because I want to be honest, of course, being younger as a programming language probably helped to write a different language, because I think that Java and PHP just turned 30 and Rust is 10, so it makes sense that, let's say, that at least we learned something. This doesn't mean that you should stop writing that type of code at all, but I mean, we are going forward, and maybe we learned a couple of things, maybe not 3, but at least a couple of things about the programming languages in these 20 years. And yes, so what about Luca? What about you? Like,
I was about to say that some new languages didn't ship generics, even though those existed for a long time. So being new is not enough. But we're not going to go into that. I would say that it's generally like I try to restrain myself from, writing another language as if it was Rust, in the same way I don't like when people write Rust as if it was Java, to make an example. But I think some things get hardwired into your brain once you've been doing Rust for a while. For example, anytime I'm looking at some code, I want to know if something is mutable or immutable. That's one of the first things I try to figure out. Is like when I'm trying to parse a function, is like what gets mutated, what is just being passed through. As Luciano was saying, I am now allergic to exceptions, which are, to be fair, I was already. So I just found the right place to be. I found them very difficult to reason about, especially in large projects. So I always try to get strongly typed exceptions at the very least, so that I know a little bit what I'm dealing with. I would say those are the two main takeaways. And then I lean on the type system as much as I can, as much as that language can support me. So I would like to have, enums in every language. I don't. I try to approximate them where it makes sense, but always with a bit of restriction, because otherwise you end up writing any idiomatic code in whatever language you end up practicing, and that is also not particularly useful. So use the language for what it can give you, but most of it is just in your brain, really.
Yes, thank you, Luca. What I really miss now that when I write simple JavaScript code is the match statement. Like, I think that I'm addicted now to the match statement. And one of the things that I really miss, like when I have other languages. So maybe, I don't know, I think I tried to do a sort of re-implementation, but then I stopped, of course, in other languages. But that was basically one of the things that probably I miss the most, or I try to at least replicate a similar behavior. What about you, Marco?
Yeah, so I think as many years, Rust, I think, made me spoiled a bit. And so, it's hard to write code in other programming languages. I got used to the guardrails that Rust gives you. And so for work, I had to write some TypeScript, like a lot of TypeScript. And I was doing all kind of mistakes, for example, forgetting to handle exceptions, because Rust forces you to handle errors. And in general, I would say, since I learned Rust, I write simpler code. So modern languages, for example, they don't use all these object-oriented programming concepts like inheritance. And I learned that, I don't know, constructors are not that useful and all these kinds of stuff. So for example, TypeScript is huge, and when I write it, I write very simple TypeScript code. Yeah.
Can I add a bonus one that just came to me right now?
Even to Luciano, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, one thing that I realized that I learned a lot with Rust is this concept of memory is not for free. Like Rust actually makes you think about what happens to memory when you write code, which is not something I honestly ever care too much about when doing stuff in Python or JavaScript, unless maybe I was trying to do something a little bit more optimized. But then now that I know some of the things that Rust taught me, I think even just thinking about, okay, what's happening here? Am I copying this object, or am I passing a reference? Or maybe am I creating more memory than I need to be creating? Like I'm finding myself thinking more about these topics than I used to think about them before. And hopefully that helps me to write better code. But yeah, it's just interesting that because a language like Rust taught me about, yes, this problem exists and you can be more explicit about them. Maybe it's a concern that even if the language takes care, like in JavaScript, the language takes care of it most of the time, you can still have room to optimize a little bit, just if you're a little bit more conscious of what's happening behind the scenes.
Yes, I think at Rust, I don't know, it's like that friend who really reminds you about like taking care about the environment. So now you are more aware about taking care of like not throwing away trash when you walk and something like that. So something that usually maybe we might not be aware, but then once you are aware, probably you behave in a better way. I don't know if this analogy worked or not, but this has been what but really added. Nice, great. So I would like to have this episode to be just 1 hour or so. So maybe we can make even a second episode, maybe in a while. I would like maybe also all of you to do a final message, and also if you want, you can mention the next conferences you will be at. Also, if you are in the chat going to any conference, just let me know. So maybe we'll also meet in the future. Really enjoyed this conversation. I took notes. I think I'll also watch this again because I wanted to check all the links and crates and projects we talked about. So let's I see in the poll that like 60% of the people here are at Josno or beginner level. So maybe we can give a message mostly for them. We also have 30% intermediate. So let's give a final message to these people especially, and then I think we can start. We can close this first episode of this last roundtable. This was the name of this one. Who would like to go with some final message for developers here in the chat? Let's play a game. Use first. They're gonna try this anymore. We also have a quick question.
Start. Go. Since you mentioned conference, I'll be RustConf, Eurorust, and RustLab. I think that's it. And for the message, like many people mentioned that they don't like that they can't use Rust at their daily job. But my message is, if Rust is something that like brings you joy and you would like to use it professionally, don't give up. Keep practicing it, keep writing open source software with it, and so on. Eventually, if you are consistent and you study, you produce Rust code, you write Rust code, you will find something eventually, I think.
It's a very Marie Kondo way. If it brings you joy, keep it. If Java makes you sad, throw it away. No, jokes aside, I think what Mark is saying is very true. Generally, the Rust market is growing much faster than it may seem from the outside. So there's an appetite for folks who know the language. And since there's not as many people have done it professionally, an open source portfolio can very well make the difference between being called for an interview and not being considered for a position, even though ultimately background and domain knowledge matter a lot, at least for what I see on the day-to-day. So if you want to work with Rust, you can make a plan to get there. Try to understand where you want to go, what type of applications you want to work on. make sure that you know both the domain and the language, and eventually with enough attempts, it should be possible.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Marco and Luca. And I agree on the fact that maybe it doesn't have to feel like a job. So in my case, for example, it was great. Like I was doing like full-time DevRel position. Then in the weekend, on the evening, and then I write Rust code, but as something that I can enjoy. So maybe it can even be a good reason if you're not doing this professionally. And I think if you're writing this project professionally, you're already step ahead. Yes. I think we're missing Luciano. Sorry, I was almost about to skip you because usually you answer for first. So, Luciano, what about you?
Yeah, no, I think I can definitely echo what Marco and Luca just said. Maybe because I've seen a few people here in the comments, or maybe when we posted things in the socials today to share this live chat. I think there are a few people that are interested in Rust, but they haven't even started yet. So maybe that audience deserves a little bit of an incentive as well. And what I want to say to them is just try it. Don't even overthink it. I think we often do the mistake that we spend more time like studying and thinking and making plans and then never taking the first step. So what I will say, just try to take the first step. And we mentioned a few very good resources today. Even just start with the book that Luca wrote, the 100 exercises. I think that can be a very practical way to just write some code. Then you might like it, you might not like it, but at least you have done the first step and decide whether it's worth continuing on that path. Then after that, you have lots of time to overthink about all the complex topics and where your career is going to go. But just take the step, have fun, and then decide later.
I think this might even become a motto, Luciano, like do it now, there's always time to overthinking, like in the future.
Exactly.
You always have time to do that. I'm going to end the poll now about your knowledge of Rust, and I like also what Luciano said. So, and I think that I want to give a final message, which is that when I started also to learn Rust and teach Rust and create content, it's because I think it's a solid bet for the future. Like we will see this maybe in a couple of years, in 6 months, but I think we have all the sentiment that probably the Rust ecosystem is growing. I think Marco, you mentioned like that we can see this by the number of crates like downloaded. Like I think it was you.
Yes, the number of downloaded crates is doubling every year, I think. Yes.
So this is like a clear, undeniable sign. So this is I think that so. Rust is basically a bet for our future, for our careers, but I think that is really worth trying compared maybe to other bets. I don't know, maybe or some frameworks or things that might be abandoned. So the trends, the investment might be worth your time, Mauro. So yes, that's it. So thanks everyone for coming. We managed to do a 1 hour live stream on Rust with 4 Italians without mentioning the pineapple on pizza. I see that I consider this as a progress. So my audience finally has been filtered, and finally we have, but we have this, of course, but I'm nice joking. Guys, let's end this one. We have all the links about all of them, and also some links in the description for things we mentioned. I don't know if I added them all, but I added at least their own their projects. So be sure to follow them, check all these projects. And I think we are done with this first episode of the Rust Roundtable. I would like maybe to make one, I don't know, in a while. And I also want to give a special announcement just for the people here in the audience. Today I was super happy because I think that I will go to RustConf in Seattle. So I think, Marco, you will have to meet 2 times. So to RustConf and Rust Lab. I'm sorry for you, but that's it. We can also take just 1 selfie. You don't have to take 2. No worries. And yes, so that's it. Thanks, everyone. Grazie a tutti quanti. And yeah, let's keep coding in Rust and let's keep doing stuff. Hey, Astra kernel. Hi, everyone, and bye. See you next time.
Bye, everyone.
Perfect.
Bye,
everyone.
thank you.